I believe we're on Revelation chapter 6. Is that correct? Or 5? Is it 6? 6. Okay. I got so messed up last week, I completely forgot where we left off. But at any rate, Revelation 6 is where we are. We've already seen the throne room of heaven in chapter 5. The presentation, of course, of, if you want to put it that way, the presentation, the introduction of the Lamb that was slain, the one who would open the book, the only one worthy to open the book. And we see the great worship scene that is described there in the latter part of chapter 5. And now we come to chapter 6. And from here until about midway through chapter 20, we have the explanation of the seals that are going to be opened. Remember that this book that has been described in chapter 5 was written within and on the backside and sealed with 7 seals. Remember, the number 7 is a divine perfect number. It means it is sealed with a perfect seal. And Jesus Christ, that is the one represented in the vision, representing Jesus Christ, is the only one worthy to open up the book. So the remainder of the book of Revelation is a description of what is inside the book. Now there's some disagreement on that. There are some who disagree as to what the book actually contained. My conviction is that the book that is described in chapter 5 contains the remainder of the vision that's described by John. But at any rate, chapter 6 beginning is what we find described in this book as the forces that would bring Rome down. Now here in chapter 6, what we're going to see is we're going to see a synopsis, if you want to put it that way, an overview of what's going to be repeated. Revelation is a lot about repetition. In other words, if you put it in sort of a picture of a newspaper story, a front page newspaper story, what do you have? You have a headline that tells you basically what's inside the story, doesn't it? That's what a headline's supposed to do, at least. Then you'll have a secondary headline underneath it, and it will describe a little bit more about what is in the story. And then maybe you'll have a third secondary headline that will describe a little bit more detail. Then you get into the story itself, and it will tell you every detail that you would want to know about what you've just seen in the headline and in the secondary headlines underneath. Revelation is a lot like that. You're going to see a lot of repetition here because the overall message of the book is be thou faithful unto death and I will give thee a crown of life, Revelation 2:10 latter part. And then another passage in the book says the kingdoms of this world are become the kingdom of our Lord. That's the overall message of the book. We win. In other words, the Lord wins. Christianity wins over the Roman Empire. But then the remainder of it is telling you the details. And so here in chapter 6, we're going to see a beginning of what's going to be a very familiar thing that goes throughout the rest of the book. There is a, if you want to call it a formula, for lack of a better term, in opening the seals. You'll have about 5 seals that are opened at first. Then you'll have another seal opened, then a transition to a next opened. Actually, what you have is a series not only of seals, but you also have trumpets. There are 7 trumpets, and then there are 7 vials, King James says. Other versions accurately render it bowls. So you have seals, trumpets, and bowls. And each one of them give a little bit more detail than the last one did. So that sort of gives you an idea of what we're going to be confronting here. It is a depiction of the forces that are going to bring the Roman Empire down. Now, those that hold to a preterist view of Revelation would say this is talking about what would bring the Jewish system down and Jerusalem down. I don't hold to that view at all because of a lot of different reasons that we'll be encountering as we go through the book. This is more of a, if you want to call it, a universal judgment. Not universal in the sense of the final judgment of good and evil, but a universal in the sense over an entire system, an entire empire, an entire government, and that fits most appropriately with Rome. So we begin chapter 6, verse 1. And I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard as it were the noise of thunder. One of the four beasts or living creatures saying, "Come and see." King James says, "Come and see." The text of the Greek says simply, "Come." In other words, whenever you see in the text here, "Come and see," verses 1, 3, 5, and so on, the Greek text says simply, "Come." In other words, the idea is that one of the living creatures is beckoning to these horses that are coming. In other words, come, come, come. In other words, like a stage, a big stage. He's beckoning them to come in to the vision. Now we have used this, I say we in Churches of Christ, we have used "come and see" occasionally over the years in evangelism. Come and see. In other words, come and visit us. And that's appropriate. But I'm pointing out that the text simply says "come." In other words, he's beckoning to these horses to come in to the vision. So he says, as it were the noise of thunder. The Lamb opens a seal. One of the living creatures speaks, and his voice is so powerful, it is almost as if it's thundering. It's that commanding a voice. Now, verse 2. And I saw, and behold, a white horse. A white horse. Now you've heard of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. I'm sure you've heard that phrase used in popular culture and in connection with different things. There, I believe, way back in the 30s, if I'm not mistaken, there were four football players that were known as the four horsemen. And it was a play off of this chapter. Well, actually, what we've got here are horses. Not horsemen, they're horses. And the first horse is a white horse. Now, white can mean purity, but in this context is not necessarily purity. White, in this context, more is a symbol of victory. White can symbolize victory, and this is what this symbolizes. But what kind of victory? It says, he that sat on him, there's someone sitting on him, so thus the four horsemen. He that sat on him had a bow. Now, a bow, that would mean somebody that could shoot a bow and arrow. In other words, he's holding a bow in his hand on this horse. And a crown was given unto him. Notice. So he's got some sort of military power, and he's got some sort of authority. And he went forth conquering and to conquer. Now, what in the world does that symbolize? Well, this symbolizes conquest, military conquest. Remember, in context here, these are the forces that are going to bring Rome down. The first force is conquest, military conquest. Now, what military force that besieged Rome, that plagued Rome, was known for its cavalry and known for its archery? Parthia. The Parthian cavalry were very much feared by the Romans on their eastern border. They never could subdue Parthia. Have you ever heard of the phrase, taking a Parthian shot? He took a Parthian shot. What does that mean? It means that you're, as you're ending up, you're sort of getting your dig in there. Well, the Parthian shot was the fact that the Parthian cavalry were so talented and so trained that as they were galloping this way, they could actually turn in the saddle and shoot their arrow behind them and do it accurately. Well, that was one of the many reasons why the Parthians were feared by the Romans. So this was a very appropriate symbol to symbolize the larger problem that they would face of military conquest. And when he had opened the second seal, verse 3, I heard the second beast say, "Come," or "come and see," King James. And there went out another horse that was red, a red horse. And power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another. And there was given unto him a great sword. So on the heels of the military conquest, you now have another horse that comes that's blood red, which would symbolize blood, obviously, or in this context, some sort of internal war, civil war, if you will. And power, that word power is italicized in the King James, means it was added by the translators, and it was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth. In other words, he's not bringing peace, he's taking it from them. And that they should kill one another. There's this internal fighting, in other words. And there was given unto him a great sword. So you have military conquest, the first horse. Second horse, civil war, which would be a very logical follow-up to that. That's another force that brought Rome down. Edward Gibbon's Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire famously details these forces that we're talking about here as to what eventually brought the empire completely down to its knees. And so, verse 5, when he had opened the third seal, I heard the third beast say, Come, or come and see. And I beheld, and lo, a black horse. And he that sat on him had a pair of balances, or a balance, in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the four beasts say, A measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny, and see thou hurt not the oil and the wine. So what is that symbolic of? Well, you've already had military conquest, you have civil war. What follows it? Famine. Famine. This is what this represents. A black horse would represent death, some sort of sickness or death. And that's exactly what we're talking about. He has a balance. Now, what does this balance do? Well, verse 6, he's talking about prices of different items. The King James uses the phrase penny. Well, actually, that is a denarius. The Roman measurement of coinage was a denarius. So a measure of wheat for a denarius, that's a day's wage. You work for a full day and you get to buy a measure of wheat. And 3 measures of barley for a denarius. Those are the basics. Those are the staples. Those are the necessities. In other words, what you're paying for on wheat is about $42 a bushel. And barley about $33. That's high priced. And then notice, see thou not hurt the oil and the wine. The luxuries aren't touched. The luxuries aren't touched at all. It's the necessities that are affected. So you've got famine, you've got shortages of food, you've got shortages of the staples and the basics. And that's exactly what took place in Rome eventually. And when he had opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth beast say, Come, or come and see. And I looked, and behold, a pale horse. And his name that sat on him was Death. And hell, or Hades, followed with him. And power was given unto him over the fourth part of the earth, to kill with sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with the beast of the earth. So what do you have here? You've got pestilence. This pale horse represents pestilence. It follows war, and it follows famine. Notice, death sat on him. Hades followed him. That's representative of the fact that you're talking about the end of life, the end of all things. And notice this power that was given was not ultimate power. It wasn't a great sweeping power. It was a partial power. A power over the fourth part of the earth. That is, in other words, he's limited. This is a limited power that's given. And notice how he hurts. He kills with sword, hunger, death, and beasts. 4 things mentioned. That's not coincidental. The number 4 representing the earth. In other words, this is something that affects the empire, but only part of the empire. This is a partial judgment. I think it's Ray Summers in his commentary, Worthy is the Lamb, that makes the point that chapter 6 is descriptive of partial judgments that are going to build in intensity until we find the complete takedown of Rome toward the end of the book. I think there's something to be said for that. I more look at it as an overview of what's going to be described in more detail later. But however you want to take that, it's still descriptive of the forces that are going to be bringing the Roman Empire completely down. And when he had opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of them that were slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. So now you have a pause in this. This fifth seal is open. What does he see? He sees the souls of those who have been killed for the cause of Christ. These martyred saints. Now the preterist approach to Revelation looks at that phrase, the altar, and they immediately assume that that's talking about the altar in Jerusalem. Well, that's an assumption that cannot be proved. The altar is assumed here to be the altar in heaven, a symbolic altar. In other words, he sees the souls of those who were slain for the word of God and the testimony which they held. There were brothers and sisters in Christ who had been killed for the cause of Christ. Had they been killed by the Jews? Yes. But had they been killed by the Romans as well? I say yes too. In other words, these brothers and sisters who had been murdered because of standing for the truth, the focus is now upon them. And verse 10, they cried with a loud voice. Here's the reason for judgment. Here's the reason all of this is taking place that John describes, that God reveals through Christ to John. Here's the reason for it. Saying, how long, O Lord, holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth? They're waiting for vindication. The martyred saints are waiting for vindication. And what John is describing in this book is the vindication that they so richly deserve. So this is the reason why all this is being described. This is the reason why all of this is unfolding the way it is. In verse 11, white robes were given unto every one of them. Now here, white robes symbolize both victory, the victory of the martyrs, and purity. In other words, they are righteous and true to the faith. And it was said unto them that they should rest yet for a little season, until their fellow servants and their brethren that should be killed as they were should be fulfilled. That always gives me pause when I read that. These martyred saints that are described, that are waiting for vindication, they're waiting for judgment. And what are they told? They say, you need to wait for a little while until the rest of your fellow brethren that should be killed. That sounds like that's terrible, it sounds like to us. Should be fulfilled. But yet think about it. These brethren that are going to be killed for the cause of Christ are being faithful to the cause. They are fulfilling their duty and their obligation as preachers and teachers of the gospel and as evangelists and living for the Lord. And so because of that faithfulness, they're going to be killed. And so the Lord is not saying they're not going to be put to death. He's promising they're going to be put to death. And so we're going to have to wait until that happens before all this takes place. And I beheld when he had opened the sixth seal. Here's the transition seal, in other words. And lo, there was a great earthquake. And the sun became black as sackcloth of hair. And the moon became as blood, and the stars of heaven fell unto the earth, even as a fig tree casteth her untimely figs, when she is shaken of a mighty wind. And the heaven departed as a scroll when it is rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. That sounds like final judgment, but it's not. This kind of descriptive language is used in describing the judgment of nations and cities and empires. You can look throughout the Old Testament, such as Joel chapter 2, Isaiah chapter 13, and other places where similar language is used by the Old Testament prophets. What he's describing is the passing away of an order, the passing away of a system. And he's describing it in cosmic language. And it's very appropriate, especially when you're thinking about the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was the universal empire. It was the world's first true superpower, stretching all the way from Britannia in the west, almost to Persia in the east, and almost up into the barbarian Europe north. So it was truly a global empire, not only a land power, but also a sea power. No one, it seemed, could stand up against it. And so this language is highly appropriate to use. The passing away of the Roman political order is described when he says, there was a great earthquake and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair. In other words, everything that you thought was in order is going to be taken away. The moon became as blood. The moon became as blood. Doesn't Peter use similar language in Acts chapter 2 when he's preaching? That's talking about the fact of Joel's prophecy. This is that which was spoken by the prophet Joel, and part of that was the sun will become dark and the moon become as blood before that great and notable day of the Lord comes. In that case, it was the day of the Lord, the gospel being preached in its fullness and the kingdom being established. Here, it's talking about the Roman Empire being done away with. It could also, and there's something to be said for this, it could also bring to mind different natural disasters that befell Rome, such as Mount Vesuvius erupting, the destruction of the city of Pompeii, a very cosmic, if you want to use that word, disaster that took place at several instances throughout the empire. Now, verse 13, when he's talking about the stars of heaven falling to the earth, heaven departing as a scroll, verse 14, every mountain and island moved out of its places, bringing to mind these natural disasters quite possibly. The hopelessness of the wicked is being described. The terror that they would feel as a result of all of these things that all of a sudden are happening in sequence. And they don't know what's going on. They have no fathom of what is taking place. Verse 15. And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, and the chief captains, and the mighty men, and every bondman, and every free man. 7 classes of people. Not talking about the divine number now in this sense. This is a complete number. In other words, all classifications of mankind. Every aspect of society hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains. They're trying to hide. They're trying to get away from all of this. Something's happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear, as Buffalo Springfield would say in 1967, that song For What It's Worth. Well, that's what really, in essence, was going on. They're saying something's happening. We don't know what's going on. And they said to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand? They don't know where to go. They don't know what to do. Where can we go to hide from all of this? Well, the answer is going to be given beginning of chapter 7. Who can stand? It seems like every classification of society, every part of mankind is being affected. But the one notable thing that's missing here so far is the Lord's church. Where are God's people in all of this? What happens to them? Well, we're going to be told the answer here in just a moment. Before we get into chapter 7, however, any questions or comments before we proceed? Anything that you might not be clear about? That I might not be clear about, for that matter. Everybody's on the same page. That's good. Chapter 7. If you believe that, I got some swampland in Arizona. Verse 1. And after these things, I saw 4 angels standing on the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, nor on the sea, nor on any tree. Now we know that the earth doesn't have 4 corners. We know that. That's a symbol. What does that symbolize? That simply symbolizes world or a global judgment. The 4 winds symbolize divine retribution in this context, because there were 4 angels indicating this is an earthly judgment that's going to be meted out in this chapter. And so they're restraining these winds to not blow on the earth and the sea or any tree. And I saw another angel ascending from the east, literally ascending from the sun rising. As the sun rises, you see an angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God. Now, the seal of the living God in this context indicates some sort of protection. That's what a seal does. You have a seal, an official seal of the government that would protect you from different things. In the case of the Roman Empire, if you had the seal, the official imprimatur of the government, that would give you authority to go and buy and sell and travel more freely than others, and also provide you protection from any kind of legal proceedings. In this sense, it is protection for the people of God. And he cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels, to whom it was given to hurt the earth and the sea, saying, hurt not the earth, neither the sea, nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads. You might have heard about this, haven't you? People that are being sealed, having a seal stamped on their foreheads. You might have seen tracts from different religious groups that were circulated. Maybe you've seen the cartoon tracts that I used to look at when I was little. My dad would pick up different tracts from religious groups when he'd go to different places. And I well remember him picking up a tract from a certain religious group that supposedly depicted what's going to happen at the end of time. And they used the things described in Revelation as if it were literally going to happen. And one of those cartoon pictures was where people had this despaired look on their face, and they've got the seal, a literal seal on their foreheads, saying that was what was literally going to happen. Well, there's a problem with that. This is a symbol. This is a symbol. In this context, it is protection for the people of God, this seal. Protection from judgments, protection from disaster, protection from those military forces that would be coming from without. Some sort of protection would be given to God's people through all this. And I heard the number of them which were sealed. And there were sealed 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel. I'm certain you've heard the number 144,000 at some point in your life, haven't you? Only the 144,000 are going to be redeemed from all the earth. Well, there's a problem with that, because the 144,000 are mentioned 2 times. This chapter and later on in the book of Revelation, and they describe 2 different groups of people. So if you take it literally, you've actually got 288,000 people. Well, it's not literal. 144,000 is a symbol. Again, it's a numeric symbol. You take the religious number 12. Remember, the religious number 12 is a result of multiplying the divine number 3 by the world number 4. You come up with number 12, religion. You take that number 12 and multiply it out until you get to 144,000. That number 144,000 is the perfect religious number. Not perfect in the sense of flawless, but in other words, it's the ultimate number in religion. This is a symbolic number representing those in the Jewish economy and in patriarchy who would be sealed. Notice, of the tribe of Judah were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Reuben were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Gad were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Asher were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Nephthalim were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Manasseh were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Simeon were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Levi were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Issachar were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Zebulun were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Joseph were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Benjamin were sealed 12,000. Now, all of these tribes that are described, did you notice that there were two that were not mentioned? Which two tribes, class, were not mentioned in this chapter? Dan is one. What's the other one? Yes, sir. Dan and Ephraim. Now, why were Dan and Ephraim not mentioned in this context? Right. They were the substitutes for Dan and Ephraim. So why were Dan and Ephraim omitted? Think. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely correct. You get the bozo biscuit. Whatever we give out. Well, I don't know what we give out. Dan and Ephraim, both. Not only Dan, but Ephraim too. Dan and Ephraim both were given over into idolatry. They, in essence, led the 12 tribes into idolatry. And because of that, they're not mentioned in this context. And so Joseph takes the place of one, and then Manasseh takes the place of the other one. So you've got the 12 tribes represented symbolically. What does this represent? This represents the fact that all of those in the Old Testament days, I would say, I would include the patriarchs in with that, all of them would be protected. In other words, all of them will be represented in heaven. Notice verse 9. After this I beheld, and lo, a great multitude, which no man could number, of all nations and kindreds and people and tongues. 4 groups of people. Notice that. Stood before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes and palms in their hands. Notice. A great multitude which no man could number. I well remember Brother Guyan Woods speaking at the Freed-Hardeman Lectureship when I was a student. And he gave a nighttime keynote address on the eternal security of the believer. And of course refuted the denominational view of eternal security and presented what the New Testament teaches. And he turned to this passage right here. A great multitude which no man could number. And emphasized about how many people there are going to be in heaven. Think about it. Sometimes we emphasize what the Lord said, rightly so, in Matthew 7. Few there be that find it. And sometimes we make that few seem to be so few, there's just going to be a few people in heaven. Well, that's not true. In contrast to the many who will be lost, no question there are few. Think about the multiplied billions upon hundreds of billions of souls that will be lost. But then think about all the souls that will be saved. And it's a great multitude which no man could number, of all nations, kindreds, people, and tongues. They've got white robes and palms in their hands. Palms symbolizing rejoicing, and also the white symbolizing victory. Well, this is an appropriate place for us to stop. So we're going to pause right here until next week, right in the midst of this great scene that is being described for us, and we'll take up with our study at that